Thank you for everyone who is able to attend. Right, we are a sold-out conference. This is the second year in a row. This is the biggest Transport Chicago ever, to my knowledge. We're 41 years in. We've had the most session proposals. You could thank David and the crew for that. You know, we've got the most sponsors, and we've done the most fundraising, and really it's thanks to our sponsors. So I wanted to kick this off as a big thank you. First to our gold sponsors, CDM Smith, who you've seen those really neat little cases of utensils. Please take those. If you don't, I'm going to take a few and give them to my friends. This is going through automatically. Don't know why it's doing that. And HNTB, always with us, you know, always there in the front and helping us out. Really great relationship with those folks. Bunch of new silver sponsors and returning sponsors, right? Cambridge Systematics, now a silver sponsor. Jacobs, Arcadis, new this year. Man, what the hell? Is it moving for you guys too? I'm not touching it. Arcadis is new. HGR has joined us. Mott McDonald has joined us. David. WSP, and then of course our bronze sponsors like Arab, CB Burke, RSG, Pace, now a bronze sponsor. I'll tell you why. GFT and TY Lin, who really make this conference happen. And there's so many thanks to you all for being here. You send a lot of folks. We're a very large sponsor group, but also a lot of other folks from so we're really happy to get you all together. Also wanted to say big thank you to Eric Kempel with Kempel ITC, who's our coffee sponsor, who sponsored our coffee break there in the morning. So if you guys think that there's a need for more coffee, yeah, actually, let's give him a round of applause. I'm talking too much. For everybody, right? You all make this happen, and we're really grateful for the folks at CMAP for printing our programs, Pace for our posters and our pins. Those really cool pins are designed by Pace, like a turnaround in 2 weeks or something like that. Not full printing, so yeah, let's give them a round of applause. And APA Illinois for CM credits, alongside a lot of our pre-conference events that we've had, partnerships with ITE, Equiticity, the Union League Club of Chicago, and soon Nick D. All of this really is a great way to bring folks together year-round as we're developing the conference, right? And it's because of your attendance, it's because of your organization's support that we're able to do something like this. And the next stage up is about 800 people, so I need everyone to bring one extra friend next year, and we'll get a new venue. Not that this one isn't bad, but there'll be more people. So, yeah, thank you to our sponsors. And yeah, I'm going to turn this over to Jill, our secretary, who's going to cover a few extras that we've had going on the entire time.
Hi, everyone. Before we recognize this year's student work competition winners, I wanted to highlight what an impressive competition it was this year. We received submissions from numerous students representing 6 different universities, making this a very competitive field. All right, here we go. As I announce your name, please rise to be recognized. This year's 3rd place goes to Dariel Cruz Rodriguez for his poster, Competition Takes Flight, the Impact of Low-Cost Carriers at Chicago's O'Hare. 2nd place goes to Anshul Bansal for her poster, Decarbonizing the CTA Bus Fleet Emissions Hotspots and Electrification Pathways for Chicago. And 1st place this year was Mariam Yousefi Basari for her poster, How Do Non-Emergency Medical Transportation Services Influence Patients' Subjective Well-Being? Congratulations to all of our winners and all of our participants. It was really excellent work, so thank you.
Hello, everyone, and I am sorry, Jake, about the slide issue.
Hey, I think it fixed itself.
Yeah, I was like, I don't know. I also spilled wine on Jake last night, so I think I think he hates me, but it's okay. Hello, everyone. I also realized when I came on earlier, I neglected to introduce myself. My name is David Schottke. I am Vice President of the Transport Chicago Board. And I would just like to come up here and say, me and the other board members would be remiss if we did not give a special shout out and thank you to our nearly 40 steering committee members who were essential in putting this meeting together, this event together. As I mentioned before, Transport Chicago is completely volunteer run, and we do this in our spare time. Without our steering committee doing things like making connections, organizing session logistics, putting on pre-conference events, and just being hands on the day of the conference, this event would not happen. I can guarantee you that. So if you served on the steering committee this past year, please stand up so we can acknowledge you. Thank you so much. Excellent. I didn't get a ton of sleep last night, but it would have been 0 if not for the people in this room, so I really appreciate it. Next up, it is my absolute pleasure to introduce our afternoon keynote speaker, Senator Villivalam. Senator Villivalam has been a member of the Illinois Senate since 2019, representing the 8th District on the northwest side of Chicago and northwest suburbs. He was raised on the northwest side to immigrant parents, attended George Washington University, and was involved in progressive causes before becoming the first South Asian American legislator in the Illinois General Assembly history. In 2025, Senator Villivalam spearheaded Senate Bill 2111, also known as the NETA bill. Some of you might have heard of it. Yeah. Big fans in the room of that. Which provided, among many other things, a transformational $1.5 billion investment in the Illinois transportation systems. Senator Villivalam also serves as the chair of the Senate Transportation Committee and vice chair of the Public Safety and Infrastructure Appropriations Committee. He's also very involved on the ground. I personally have seen him show up to community meetings and take time to actually talk to constituents. So let's give the senator a warm welcome here.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Good afternoon. It's great to be here. Thank you so much for that kind introduction. I want to start off by thanking Audrey Winnick with MPC, David, the entire Transport Chicago team for the invitation to be here today. And more importantly, I think the work that everyone in this room does every single day for our residents and constituents in order to get for them to be able to live and thrive in these communities. As was mentioned, I'm Villivalam. I'm state senator for the 8th District, northwest side of Chicago, northwest suburbs of Cook County. It's great to be here. I was given a suggestion that I might, they asked me how long I wanted to speak, 30 or 45 minutes. I will not be speaking for either of those times for in terms of my remarks. I'm not going to read my remarks. I'm going to go through some items, but I do want to open this up for more Q&A as we spend time together. So this has been quite the journey. You know, I don't know when I started this if I knew that this is how it would get to this point or end. But I do want to go back through this journey and hit some of the highlights, as I mentioned, just through some bullet points. You know, the first week of February, actually, in 2020, is when I was appointed the chair, being chair of the Senate Transportation Committee by Senate President Don Harmon. And I remember that day in this context very vividly because it was on that day one of my colleagues, who I won't name because I don't know that he wants the credit or blame for this, he came up to me on the Senate floor and said, you know, congratulations. And I said, thank you. I'm looking forward to being chair of the Transportation Committee. And he just said, what are we going to do about public transit? He said, we have 4 different agencies, 21 different appointing authorities, 47 different appointments. We, you know, there lacks coordination, integration. They're obviously doing some things well, but a lot can be done better. And he said, what do you think about just blowing it all up? Blowing it all up and creating a new agency, a new system, and making it so that the right hand talks to the left, but most importantly, that every person that currently uses the system, that has used it in the past, and that we want to use it in the future, has the best user experience possible to get from point A to point B to their doctor, their school, their job, which was a reoccurring theme through this entire process. And I looked at him and I said, without saying, telepathically, I'm like, dude, I just became chair today. So by me saying dude, you know it's a male colleague of mine. But I looked at him and I said, that's a great idea. We should talk about it. And he looked at me and he said, yeah, that sounds like it's really hard and probably won't happen. So that happened in February 2020. Fast forward, I think a couple years, year and a half, couple years, RTA had started to reach out and said, I skipped over this, situation we had globally that took our lives in a very different direction for 2 years, the COVID-19 pandemic. I had a couple of meetings with RTA. They reached out to really flag this fiscal cliff issue, right? We understand that the pandemic was happening, remote work was starting to really take off. The future was going to look very different. And so we started to have meetings and they started to really engage on that front with the legislature. And then we sat down, Representative Delgado and I, Representative Cam Buckner and others, and said, look, we're not working at these agencies. We're not any one of you who are working in this field, every day. And so we really need to get moving on a report and a convening to get that report done that is incredibly inclusive. And so we worked with CMAP. We created legislation, passed legislation, signed into law. The Chicago Metropolitan Agency on Planning tasked them with convening, people and commissioning this report. And I just want to, can we give them a round of applause? I don't know if, I'm sure they're here. I don't know where they are and who's here exactly, but in some ways they're the unsung heroes of this product because they spent thousands and thousands of hours, staff hours, and dealt with really what we had to deal with more in the legislature and during the course of committee hearings, negotiations, the different parts of the entire region and working to get them to a place where I think they ended up making suggestions to us instead of recommendations. That recommendations was too controversial, which you spend 1 minute in the Illinois State Capitol and you'll understand why. Even some words can be controversial, but we tasked them with this responsibility, and they took it head on. They convened the stakeholders. They commissioned the report. They submitted to the Illinois General Assembly and the governor this part report. From there, we had some bill introductions. The Metropolitan Mobility Act, the MMA. We worked, Representative Delgado and I worked with the Clean Jobs Coalition to introduce that legislation. No, we were not trying to encourage any physical altercations with the MMA acronym. But I will tell you, I joke about this bill being the bill heard around the world. The moment we introduced this bill, I guarantee you there was not a legislator in the NEDA region that did not have their phone ringing from somebody. It was either their mayor, their county board chair, their county board member, their transit advocates, their labor members, union members in their districts. People started to reach out, and it was really then that I knew, but you don't know until you know, right? That this was the shock to the system, right? That we need it. And again, it goes back to that initial conversation. Hey, this has been this way for 50 years. Do we really think that we can convince all the political entities and bureaucracy to change in this seismic way? And I think that the introduction of the MMA was a very pivotal moment in terms of laying down a marker that said, this is the vision. This is the bold vision of what we can be if we choose it, frankly, right? If we really sit down and choose it. So we introduced that legislation. Organized labor had another piece of legislation they introduced as well. I don't think it had as cool of a sounding name as the MMA, but we really saw, these two pieces of legislation as, what we had to work with. Then we took the show on the road. We had in the Senate Transportation Committee 10 committee hearings across the state. We started in Chicago, branched out to suburban Cook County, went to the collar counties, went to downstate. We had one in Springfield where we heard from 6 different downstate transit agencies. And, I probably, I think my first promise that I went back on, I kept on telling Senate Transportation Committee members, we will not go over 4 hours. Each committee hearing went over 4 hours. And so I'm very thankful to them, all the 19 members of that committee, for sticking with me, sticking with the process. But let me tell you, we, through every committee hearing, heard this reoccurring theme, right? Transit is important to our economy. Transit is important to our climate. Transit is important to public health. Transit is important and must be equitable and accessible. Transit must be, in this state, a world-class system for the next several decades, whatever solution we come up with, right? And so we started these hearings. I should say along the way, we did a delegation trip to Germany. We learned an incredible amount. Thank you to DB for helping us set that up. It was not the delegation trips that you hear about. I left Monday and came back Friday, and I was really exhausted. 3 days in Munich and a day and a half in Berlin. But it was incredibly important because we went with ultimately the stakeholders and elected officials that we needed to get this job done. We had transit advocates, we had labor advocates, we had elected officials in the room at all of the meetings, and really understanding that something different is possible. We can be a place and a system that, if Munich is able to have more cars per household than we are, but have quadruple the number of public transit rides, we can do that too. If Munich is able to coordinate, and Berlin is able to coordinate, really the whole country is able to coordinate public transit across, Munich had 36 operators and Berlin had 41 or vice versa, we can do it too, right? And so that really was an important point as well. But that trip in between all the committee hearings that we had really led us back to where we had to start negotiating, right? And making sure that we can get to an end product. And we had several rounds of negotiations. I joke to this day, there's a room in Springfield in the Stratton building that I refuse to enter for at least another couple years because I still have some PTSD from the hours and hours and days that we have spent in that room with the governor's office, the Senate, the House, the Clean Jobs Coalition, the Labor for Public Transportation Coalition, stakeholders to hammer this out, right? And, we also had to keep in mind that it was hard to get to 30 votes in the Senate and 60 in the House, but there was something larger that, we had as the reason we had to get this done, right? And it was the impending life impact that this would have on people, right? We know that we were dealing with the fact that if we had no action, we did inaction, there would be potential 40% cuts to service and potentially 3,000 pink slips that were sent out to workers that work in public transit. And so we had to act. And so we sat down for these negotiations. We used the committee hearings and the testimonies. And by the way, I think it was after the second committee hearing or after the first committee hearing, we actually had switched it up. We had 4 different panels, but what was happening was we weren't able to hear from the residents until the end. And kind of speaking to the whole point of this, we had to acknowledge that some people couldn't stay there for 4 hours and wait for their turn, right? So we actually made a change, and we put everyday riders as the first panel that provided testimony to make sure that we were getting their testimony. We were hearing from them directly as to what they're experiencing on a daily basis. And then we went on to the county chairs and the mayors and the agencies and so forth. But really, all the combination of the report and conversations with the agencies, the bills being introduced, the committee hearings, the negotiations, the threat of what would happen to people if there was inaction led us to Senate Bill 2111, which is now law as of June 1st, 2026. And so this bill, again, I can go into a lot, but this bill is based on the simple principle that we can and will achieve a safe, reliable, accessible, integrated, world-class public transit system for the next several decades. We have a situation where NEDA will now be empowered to make strategic decision-making as it relates to the core issues of service plans, capital plans, safety, making sure that while the service boards retain certain responsibilities as it relates to labor contracts and procurement and executing the service, there is this strong oversight, right, that exists. And I think most importantly, done are the days where things occur piecemeal, right? 7 different apps, 3 different service plans, 3 different capital plans, making sure that we are caring as much about the person riding in Chicago as we are in Will, McHenry, Lake, and as well as downstate. And so this legislation really aimed in every different aspect to focus on that integration and coordination. I can go into several different aspects, happy to answer those more in questions, but I just want to reiterate though that with every aspect, I truly believe that this is more than a transit bill. This is a jobs bill. This is a healthcare bill. This is an education bill. This is a safety bill. This is, a issue that really transcends every other issue, right? And I kept on trying to beat that drum to our colleagues. If you care about housing, then you should care about this bill because we're working on transit-oriented development and how to make that easier. If you care about healthcare, we're making sure that we don't experience these 40% cuts to service, but also creating a user-friendly experience so that if someone is trying to go to the doctor and they have to get there within 15 minutes of their appointment, that they don't miss that critical time with their physician. And so again, safety, another example, taking a methodical approach. I really tried to emphasize, and Representative Delgado did as well, we are not the experts on any of these fields. So we are trying to put forth a product that gives the experts a tool that the tools they need to execute a plan. So safety is another example where we gave the Cook County Sheriff the task of convening a law enforcement task force and making sure that from there, submitting a report to the newly created Office of Public Safety, of which within that there's a council that is made up not just of law enforcement but of nonviolence prevention organizations, or violence prevention organizations, and then they in turn will make a recommendation to the NEDA board. So those are just some of the examples that we envisioned and put pen to paper and got signed into law. I do want to say that the lessons learned in this legislation, and I know that you all are going to have a panel on NEDA implementation later, so I want to leave some for that. But it does, in terms of what I took away from this, anything I learned, anything is possible. We can take on a system that has been status quo for 50 years, and it can be undone. It could be, we can achieve goals that are based, legislative goals that are based on policy and data instead of politics. That can happen, right? And that was, going into this, the biggest concern, right? Is everyone has an appointment, and how do we address, and who's going to be mad, and all that, and how do we get the votes? We were able to somehow maneuver through that political, atmosphere. Be bold, right? I got to tell you, the roller coaster has been real in a lot of different ways. The reforms were incredibly challenging to accomplish, but I'm proud that we did, and it took a village, and it got done. But I got to tell you that the transformational investment of $1.5 billion, anytime you go to Springfield or DC or anywhere, whenever you start talking about revenue and how to raise revenue, it is a challenge, because every legislator, ranging from hell no to probably not to it takes us a long time to get to yes, right? And so what we never strayed from, though, Representative Delgado and I and Representative Buckner, was the need for a transformational investment. There were several calls on us to say, let's just fill the fiscal cliff. Let's give them half of the fiscal cliff. And then the fiscal cliff numbers got updated, and my colleagues started to come and say, well, it's a lower number. Let's just give them that number. And I think that because of the organizing and the coalition building that was done, we were able to stick to the $1.5 billion in transformational investment. And that is a big deal for a number of reasons, but one, in Springfield, we typically do not do a one-off funding bill. It is all packaged into a revenue omnibus and with different items for different programs and services. This happened with this bill. And number two, you never get what you ask for, right? But in this case, we did. And I think that, again, speaks to the organizing, the coalition building, but it also speaks to, we are acknowledging and recognizing two issues. One is that we've significantly underfunded public transit systemically, right? And two, that you get what you pay for, right? So every colleague that came to me and asked about a program or service in their district, I just said to them, among a number of items, I said, if you fill the fiscal cliff, you're going to get the service you have today. But if you want a forward-thinking service and program of public transit for the future, for the next several decades, then this is what we got to do. And that was helpful. I describe it as, going back to organizing and coalition building, jokingly, as you got to get you some ride or dies. We had ride or dies with the Clean Jobs Coalition, the Labor for Public Transportation Coalition, the House, Senate, and Governor. We came on the same page. That is ultimately what got something like this big done. And then lastly, it was always ask why. Why is X or Y or Z being done this way? And we kept on coming back to that. And frankly, for me, it was just because I was trying to learn, right? Representative Delgado actually worked in public transit previously. I had not. But when you keep asking that question, you get to an answer of, in a lot of the situations we dealt with, in terms of what we were trying to change. Some things we know we were working well, but something we were trying to change, well, it was just always done this way, right? And frankly, that's not a sufficient answer. And so with that, I also want to just acknowledge that it did come down to it being incredibly personal, and the personal stories that we heard from riders in the Capitol, we heard from workers. The workers on CTA, Metro, and PACE were just heart-wrenching. And so I just want to say that was a pivotal part of how we were able to get this done. And so with that, I have a few closing comments, but would love to stop there and take any questions and go for there. Hopefully that was not 30 minutes. I don't have my watch on me. All right. Fire away, please. Or do we have microphones? Okay. There's one over there in the back.
Senator, my name is Amsal Kimani. I'm a recent Master of Urban Planning graduate from the University of Illinois. NETA represents one of the most significant transportation reforms Illinois has undertaken in decades. So 5 years from now, what measurable outcomes should riders, taxpayers, and local governments expect to see if NETA is successful? And are there specific targets for things like ridership, reliability, fare integration, service coordination, or transit-oriented development that you'll be looking at? And what outcomes would you consider a sign that the reform is falling short of its original goal?
Thank you. That's a great question. I think, first and foremost, it is, as with most issues, it comes down to quantity and quality, right? So we want to make sure that everyone that is currently using public transit has the best experience. They feel safe. They are able to get from point A to point B in a reliable way. They're able to really use it any time of day and for any event, whether it's for work or entertainment. We want to make sure that that quality of experience is reflected in what we passed and is the new law. There's several metrics that we've included to help make sure that that happens. Performance metrics, service standards. We included some of that in the legislation. We also made sure that there was leeway for the new NETA board and leadership to implement the additional metrics and standards as well to achieve that quality of experience. Quantity is also incredibly important, making sure that ridership, the best way to deal with this entire situation is more ridership, right? If you have more ridership, safety improves. If you have more ridership, the funding situation gets better. If you have more ridership, people then, organically spread, through word of mouth, it starts to talk about, their experience in using public transit and so forth. And so I think there are both, they're both important factors in terms of quantity and quality. We're obviously dealing in terms of quantity with the fare box recovery ratio. We put a provision in the legislation, the law, to deal with it on a year-to-year basis, to hold some accountability for the ridership to improve. We're not, not going to do it as the Illinois General Assembly to relieve that pressure, but it gives us an opportunity to hold the agencies accountable to say, what are you doing to get back to or get close to what the ridership was? I think that in terms of 5 years, what I keep coming back to is, the Senate President says this very eloquently as well. People should be able to pull out their phone and get from point A to point B using public transit without an ideal situation in a time frame that's faster than a vehicle, without having to second guess that they're going to be able to get to where they need to go. And that is something that's hard to legislate and hard to really drill down for every single person to feel that way. But I think that is a metric that we're going to have to continue to monitor and ask and really get surveys on, right? So that is what I think about in terms of success. Again, there's a number of other items. I could have spoken about, transit ambassadors was a big part of the bill, helping with all of that, the user experience, seeing how that works. Transit-oriented development, we had made some progress on that. But again, it really does boil down to me to looking back in 5 years, what is the quality user experience, and in terms of ridership, and frankly, not just the quantity of ridership, but how are we growing, right? And I think that has to happen regionally, but also statewide, right? The job is not done in terms of what the legislature should be able to be focused on, right? There are 102 counties in Illinois. 94 of them are served by 59 downstate transit districts and transit agencies. And so how do we connect, not just here regionally in the NEDA region, but how do we also connect through the entire state? And that's another, again, if you're asking me what I look at 5-10 years from now, that is what we need to be going towards. And I really do believe one of the key metrics is going to be, can someone pull out their phone and have, one, the trust that they can be safe and they can get to their place reliably, but also I think the key ingredient is in the time that they need to, right? If it's justified that they can use public transit to get somewhere in the time that they get to their vehicle. And that also requires last mile conversations with ride share, but also, biking and so many other issues. And so that's how I would look at it. But really it's quality of experience, quantity of ridership and where it's coming from, and then the entire vision of interconnectivity through this region and through the entire state. I see one over there. And those with microphones, yeah, please tell me to.
Hello. So just one quick question with respect to NEDA. Obviously, pairing revenue and reform throughout this process has been a huge part of the effort, but also recognizing that in the US especially, we do have a transit cost issue in terms of how expensive it is to get new infrastructure off the ground and rolling and implemented. Just curious from your perspective as a legislator, if that is an issue you have been thinking about that was tinkered around with during the NEDA process, and if there are any future efforts coming down the pike with respect to that.
With respect to infrastructure?
With respect to infrastructure and the expense of it in the United States, yes.
Oh, it's a great question. We obviously we're working to address the operational need first. That was the most dire in the moment as it relates to potential service cuts and job losses. And so, and frankly, it's a little harder in some ways. As you all know, the state budgets are getting tighter and tighter, and we're experiencing federal pressures in different ways. And so that was the main focal point. That being said, it was absolutely brought up. I remember vividly, right, during the course of the hearings, the Metra executive director bringing up the capital repair backlog that existed for our rail system, right? And we in Illinois, we're the most unique as it relates to our rail system, 6 Class 1 railroads and everything that we have going on, and so I think that there lays some answers in the Rebuild Illinois Capital Plan from 2019. There was a section of an answer, or a component of an answer to that question in this bill. We utilized $200 million of the road fund interest to put towards transit capital. 180 million of that goes to the NEDA region, 20 million goes to the downstate transit districts. And then in addition to that, we worked really diligently for downstate to make funds available and directed to Quad Cities Rail to Chicago and move forward on Peoria to Joliet to Chicago in the next phase of that. But to answer your question more directly, that is again, why the work isn't complete, because we need to go back and understand, again, what we're getting now from the federal government in terms of transit capital as it relates to the last few years. And then I think the next capital bill is going to be a big conversation that we have at the state level as to how we fully address the capital needs that exist in our transit spaces.
Hi, I'm Patrick Durkin with Cubic Transportation. So one of the big benefits, I think, of the NETA bill is that we're going to see more integration of the local agencies, but given that Chicago and Northern Illinois is a hub for the region at large, what ways are we able to interface with our state neighbors across state lines, the agencies there, and what sort of challenges do we face that they do not have the same sort of legislation passed as us?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think first and foremost, I appreciate you asking it, because it's a reminder that every major public transit system in the nation is undergoing a similar situation. And so I just want to take this, opportunity to say, like, it's June 12th, June 1st, the law became effective. I'm going to take a deep breath, right? Deep breath, woosah, right? We have, in some ways, a lot of our neighbors and a lot of other systems watching what we're doing, right? And what we're going to be able to accomplish. And that's a lot of pressure, but I think that we have to also go into this with saying, here's the bar. However, we all are in this together, and we're going to keep working at it. And I think if that's the mindset, right, that already accomplishes the goal of not putting too much pressure on ourselves, but also the goal of making sure that we're thinking about it with a regional and or statewide mindset, right? That's what this is about. And so I think that is a very important to acknowledge. I think that, it's incredibly hard for me. I spent a lot of time understanding, our region, and frankly, downstate transit is even more confusing. But it's hard for me to understand every other public transit system and how they work. What I will tell you, though, is that I strongly believe that we are going to be in a position where we're now we're speaking with one coordinated voice, right? And that, is incredibly important. And so just even talking about the structure that we're putting in place, right? One, obviously, everyone's focused on the NETA board composition and NETA being now empowered over the service boards in a very real way, over CTA, Metro, and PACE, and being able to have the authority on service plans, on capital plans, making sure that their right hand is talking to the left, and so forth. But through the new composition, we included 5 state appointees that are appointed by the governor and confirmed by the Senate. And I think that's important because, as we talk about, the challenge of getting this done, when you talk about 21 different appointing authorities and 47 different appointments, well, one, the age-old, conversation about, oh, well, so-and-so was appointed because that was so-and-so's guy, or that was so-and-so's person, right? And we had to get away from that, right? That's the politics of the past. That was what had to be done in 1970 whatever, or 1982, but that's not the politics, or shouldn't be the politics of today, and that's what we rejected. But in addition to reducing the appointing authorities from 21 to 8, you still have the mayor of Chicago, the Cook County board president, and the 5 collar counties. I have faith and trust in them as appointing authorities. I think that having the governor and the state have 5 people on this board is going to give us more of that regional and statewide mindset. Whenever you're appointed by someone, there is some level of, it's not a loyalty, it's not allegiance, but it's responsibility to that jurisdiction, right? And that's fine. That's how the mayor's appointed, City of Chicago, Cook County, and the collars. But I strongly believe that having 5 state appointees will provide a different perspective on this newly empowered board that will then help this board further speak in one unified voice so that we can accomplish things with Indiana, with Wisconsin, with Iowa, and so much more. I think that there has to be that more global mindset. And frankly, you see it already with a lot of the projects that, frankly, I get asked to sign on to letters of support for federal projects as chair of transportation. And I think that you'll see even more coordination and a unified voice through this new law and through the new agency. Got one dead center here, and then one over there.
Hi, my name is Amanda Madrigal. I work for CTA, and this bill has done a lot, like you said, for service and operations and the future of the transit agencies in the region. My question, my question is related to land use, and I know you mentioned this bill is a housing bill, a safety bill, et cetera. I guess I know that in Illinois, the land use is at the home rule, the local level, but how can NEDA or the governor's office leverage some of this work that's in this bill to advance or influence land use to promote more of or help assist the improvements in the transit service adjustments in the future and improve ridership and within NEDA's region?
Thank you. Yeah, it's a great question, and again, I have never seen a piece of legislation have this many stakeholders involved. Right? I was talking to everyone between the mayor of Chicago, 2.5 million people, to a suburban mayor that represents 800 people, and everyone in between. And I think every issue involved every stakeholder, whether it was the appointments, whether it was transit-oriented development, safety. Think about safety, right? You have a situation where something happens. I give this near my district, the Blue Line Jefferson Park stop, something happens. CPD is called, CTA folks are called. By the time they're able to respond or the incident transpires completely over time, not maybe even more than completely, the Blue Line train can be in Rosemont. So then the Rosemont Police Department. So there's a lot of coordination, integration at every single level that has to happen. And there's a lot of opinions on how that needs to happen. And so I would say that as it relates to development, CTA did actually come to us and kind of identify that they would like some more assistance and authority as it relates to developing properties around stations and so forth. And so we very much in the MMA started off incredibly bold, and then we were able to land, in terms of transit-supported development, being able to develop property near transit stops and maintain real estate inventory. This is what NEDA can do. Administer development incentive grants, includes the People Over Parking Act, limiting minimum parking requirements near transit hubs. Thank you for the applause. I still hear about it from my mayors every time I see them. And then we made some progress with transit-oriented development, across the state, but there's a lot more to do. And so I think that, frankly, this is where you all come in, right? We were able to get this, and I said all what I said. I passed the bill through the Senate to the governor at 5 a.m. Friday, on Halloween, Friday, October 31st, which some people are like, you passed it in the middle of the night. And to that, I would just tell them, look at the receipts, right? We went through these committee hearings, we went through bill introductions, we went through the part report, and so much more. But I say all that to say that part of the challenge with something this massive is that we need it to get off the ground, and then from there we continue to identify what needs to be worked on. And I do believe transit-oriented development and development in general around public transit, and even in public transit deserts, that's something that we need to learn more about and get feedback on. So thank you for the question. One more question.
So
Go ahead.
you have outlined the 5-year process of getting here and the many challenges and obstacles along the way. But now we're at this point of having this really ambitious law, and the implementation phase begins. And I wonder, what is it that concerns you about implementation in the first couple of years?
Thank you for the question. My first concern is making sure everyone is appointed and seated by September 1st. So I obviously am not an appointing authority. I have full confidence that the appointing authorities, will make those appointments and go through their legislative bodies. But I think that process in itself, I want to highlight that because it's incredibly important. People will have the ability to ask these appointees questions as they move through their confirmation processes to be on the NEDA board come September 1. And so I think that I highlight that not so much as a concern, but as an opportunity for us to address concerns, right? Through this process over the next 90 days, we're going to see these appointments occur, and I think that we need to ensure that the public is engaged and we're asking the right questions of these appointees, just like any elected official gets asked, in terms of, what they stand for and how they would handle situations and so forth. I think that the second issue I would highlight is just making sure that, the law will require changes. I'm also hopeful, and I do want to take this opportunity to acknowledge and give them a round of applause. The CTA, Metro, and PACE employees, everybody that works at these agencies, let's give them a round of applause for all of the work that they've done. I want to acknowledge that because while we were focused on riders losing service and maybe not being able to get to their jobs, and the 17,000 public transit workers that work every day in public transit losing their jobs, there was a lot of conversation, not a lot, but there was conversation about, maybe some of the anxieties that people at these agencies will feel. And I want to be very clear, we know that there's incredibly hardworking people at these different agencies. And we believe that there's going to be, a thorough process in how we move forward as it relates to their roles and so forth. But I bring that up because the concern really is, and I always say this, we can require action through laws, but we also want to make sure that there's a cultural shift within these agencies, right? To acknowledge that this is the change that we're seeking, and this is what the law is intended in terms of safety, reliability, accessibility, integration, and so forth. So I think making sure that, as the agencies move forward at the service board level especially, but also at the NEDA board level, right? Making sure, and that we worked in all sorts of integration. I'll tell you, we made it such that the executive directors of each of the service boards have to come before the NEDA board, right? And we made it such that the NEDA ED has to go before the service boards, right? We want there to be that cross, cultural integration, and that way, and then obviously in addition to 17 out of the 20 NEDA board members being overlapping with the service boards. But I think that making sure that in the most appropriate way that we see the cultural shift as well, in addition to the law. And then lastly, it's the sense of urgency, right? We need, I meant it when I said take a deep breath, because I think that we all need to recalibrate and we all need to get ready for this. And there's going to be some trial and error. And there's going to be, we had one follow-up piece of legislation in Springfield to address cleanup changes. There's going to be others. But we need to make sure that the sense of urgency, just as there was a sense of urgency to avoid 40% cuts to service and 3,000 pink slips, that the sense of urgency to tackle a universal fare system, to tackle the technology, for there to be one app, to make sure that not just the statistics are going down on this number of safety incidents, but also the perception, right, has to do much better as well. And so the sense of urgency has to be, we're going to hit the ground running. We understand that there are certain deadlines in the NETA legislation that they put forward, but if we can achieve that goal quicker as it relates to service standards or universal fare or whatever it is, then we need to approach it that way, because ultimately it's about the riders, right? We want to make sure that they're getting to a place where their experience is getting better faster, but also that, if I always said it was in three buckets. It's people that rode the system before that don't now, people that currently ride the system, and then people that never have ridden the system, right? If we can get the latter two buckets back on board or on board, then that changes the whole dynamic, right? Of not just transit, but really all of our communities and how that looks, right? And so the sense of urgency is what's going to accomplish that, right? And so those are some of the items that I would outline. I don't want to. I've lost a lot of sleep over concerns, so I'm not going to go into all the detail. But I do have faith in the system that we put in place, and I do believe we're going to have incredibly qualified people at every level to make sure we achieve the goals that we've set out. Thank you. So with that, I just want to say, it was an honor to work on this legislation. I think that it was incredibly hard to get done, but we're here 11 days after its effective date, and we're really leaning on everyone in this room. I think about how I closed in committee when we had our hearing. This is all personal to everybody. My mom came to this country in 1976, and she came with my brother, who was 2 at the time. He's much older, but he acts like 2 sometimes still today. But I remember that specifically because she was a teacher in India. She couldn't get that job when she got here. She worked as a cashier at AmVets. She went back to school at NEIU, actually, to get a bachelor's in computer science. And she had evening classes and computer labs in the weekends. And it was the CTA bus that she took with my brother, who was about 5, and my sister, who was just being born, to those evening classes back and forth. And I tell you that because we heard that, first of all, I wouldn't be here without that, right? But secondly, we heard that story over and over again, and so I say that to say that it's incredibly important that we remember who this is about, and it's incredibly important that we're all in this together. And when I say together, we are leaning on you all as the experts to help us execute, help us tell us what's going right, and tell us what's going wrong and what we need to improve. And it's our job to then take that and make improvements to what I think is a seismic change from the past 5 decades. But with that, thank you so much for all that you do, and thank you for having me.